Hey everybody, sorry to disappoint you. It's Mike and Tim and not Seth. I mean, the number of emails we're getting now requesting, demanding, threatening if they don't get if we don't like give the people a Seth intro. It's a large amount. I mean, and it's increasing. And so there's definite fan club that is developing. Maybe we need to start something called the Seth Cast.
I think we've teased that before. And Seth, I don't know though, because Seth's ego is getting kind of big. I've seen him walking around, his chest all puffed out.
Totally. And he's at school today, which I have to be honest is great for my focus, but not great for the audience. So we're sorry. We did release something along the lines of a Seth Cast. In The Wanderer, we released the first episode of The Wanderer. Tim, you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, we started we started a little mini series on talking about U2 and theology. The first episode was last week, and it was mostly our history with the band and how it mirrored our spiritual journeys and stuff. And the second episode will come out 2 days after this, and it's a much deeper dive and a little bit more focused, a little less wandering.
It's our two Tims. It's two Tims, a band U2, and a whole bunch of words, and it's glorious. So that comes out on the Voxology feed. So just if you're wondering what that was, that's what it was. So this is where I get to wander, and we had to create a space for the Tims to wander. So before we hit the music, Timothy, we've got a Seth-related questions. We're now getting Seth-related questions via the interwebs. This one's from Randall, who has become my new favorite person in the world. Seth, my man, in all caps. I love Muse, right? Seth is a big Muse fan. M-U-S-E, band out of England. I even have a couple of their albums on vinyl. Which, I mean, let's go. I need to know what Seth's favorite songs are by Muse. All right. So Seth isn't here right now, but I can answer with very clear assurance because we play the same three over and over and over. I would say a minimum of 100 times each.
Wow.
So his current favorite is a song called Get Up and Fight. And it was off their last album. It's not one of Daddy's favorites, of course, but Seth loves it, and so we play it a lot. And so if he's asking for it, he'll just call it Fight, and then give you like boxing in the air sort of fists. And so we listen to that one. The second one is Starlight, one of their biggest hits. He loves it, and he loves starting it over. Yeah. So we'll get about 3/4 of the way through it, and start it over and just do that, ad nauseum. And then the third song is Pressure. Or is that what it's called? No, it's don't push. Yeah, Pressure maybe. Pressure's off. Pressure something. It's off the latest album as well, and it's he calls it Snap because I snap my fingers to the kind of cool beat it's got. So there you go, Randall. And I would tell you my favorite Muse songs, but you don't seem to care. So Seth Erre it is. Yes, Seth Erre, a big Muse fan. And there's another one called Reapers that he loves, and then there's one he loves called. These are all kind of current. Although he loved Uprising back in the day. So maybe Seth and I should have a Muse cast, and we could sing it. Yes, Snap. I'm so good at snapping. Anyway.
Eddie put out a new single. He's got a solo album coming out.
I know, right? Eddie Vedder, for those of the uninitiated, the Gen X sort of icon that we've plateaued with. Except for Miranda Lambert, has been added to the pantheon evidently by Stafford.
That's right.
So Timothy, that's our Seth update. Hit the music. All right, ladies and gentlemen, today We have a few people to thank, and we've got some Bible to look at. The people, Kelly, April, and Stephen, we want to thank you so much for coming on the Patreon team. Patreon.com/Voxology Podcast is where you can find us. Man, we are a crowd-funded nonprofit and are so grateful for people like you and many others who help pull all of this off. So thank you very much for that. And then we're going to try to get through some notes today. It's going to be glorious. We're starting to get some great questions. And in fact, there are a couple of questions we got in. One, I don't know if it's expressing concern or more just curiosity about why we would have Dr. A.J. Levine on the podcast if she is not a follower of Jesus. And if Jesus, according to Jesus, is kind of the point of the thing, then why would we, I don't even know how to word this politely, but why would we care? Kind of what her take is the gist of it. And I understand the question for sure, right? There is in the Gospels a very Jesus-centered sort of thing going on, and Paul will say things like no one can say Jesus is Lord except by the Spirit, and so there. I understand the questions, but I do just want to take a moment to say, well, knowing though that concern, why have that conversation? And part of it for me, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too, Timothy. Part of it for me has been I have found it's several reasons. One, I found the traditional evangelical hermeneutical circle incredibly narrow and narrow in the sense of it doesn't engage well with other critical parts of New Testament studies. It doesn't engage well with other theological systems. I've just found it to be airtight and sealed, and I just don't think the Bible comes at us this way. So I actually read feminist scholars, African American scholars, LGBTQ scholars, trying to recognize my own place when I come to the text, and then also realizing that part of the reason why the text is so alive is that it speaks, right? It's not just for something that was 2,000 years ago. It's still speaking, and there are things. Bonnie, our last interview with Bonnie brought up something. I was like, wow, that is such an interesting perspective. And even AJ, how the Old Testament ends in the Jewish reckoning versus how it ends in the Christian reckoning, really set some stuff up. So I still think there is a ton to learn from folks. And I've come to believe that the Bible pretty well teaches that not everything that it calls itself Christian is Christian, and not everything that is non-Christian is non-Christian. Yep. And so I don't trust labels. I trust other things. And so for AJ, she is a very reputable New Testament scholar. She plays in the evangelical space nicely with others, which is, unique. And man, she's got a doozy of a personality. So yes, of course we discern was one of the emails. Well, I'm going to read this or hear this with discernment. And my point is you should do that with anybody. Yep. If your evangelical heroes, read them with discernment. Part of the reason we're in this mess is that, the good guys and the bad guys were handed down to us, and we never thought to really question some of the stuff we were hearing. And so I just, if you're going to read with discernment, don't stop with AJ. Us, particularly Stafford. I always
take the reading rainbow approach and don't take my word for it.
Yes, because the goal, the goal isn't really to convince you of what we're thinking or saying. We just literally off air, we're praying that, God would spark curiosity. That's the aim, is that Christians would approach the text again in its strangeness and find that compelling.
And I think she does exactly that. And she's incredibly wise and really, really intelligent. So she brings a lot to the table.
Well, she's everything we're not, is I think what Tim is saying in that statement. So anyway, Totally. We totally get that and understand that. But I just think there's so much to learn. And of course, we test everything. Absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely. But the world of non-evangelical scholarship has opened up a ton of the Bible to me. And I read it obviously with a careful eye and committed to Jesus and a high view of the text. But man, there is some stuff out there that I'd never known in my very narrow seminary education that, and that's part of the reason why people get wrecked by this stuff is that we've never told people it's out there. And when you realize, oh my goodness, there are great insights coming from all directions. And the posture that we're to have is to test everything and hold on to the good and to not be threatened by that. Yeah. I don't know. It just opens up the thing. And so nobody, I think, that emailed in is saying we shouldn't learn from people who aren't Jesus followers. No one's saying that. But it was just more like, hey, I'm going to hear her with a different level of discernment. And my thought is, well, good, as long as you're doing that everywhere else, because part of the trap we're in, and really the overwhelmed, sort of question we get is, well, how do you know what to trust? I mean, there's so many different takes on this thing.
Totally.
How do you know?
That was the last episode or I guess at this point, not the last episode, but the previous to last episode of that Mars Hill was a bonus episode that's interviews with Joshua Harris. And kind of picking apart his journey and kind of the culture that put a teenager in a position to write a book on a teenage virgin to write a book on purity and marriage and sex and stuff. And in hindsight, we're like, that's ludicrous. But, it sold millions of copies and he became a spokesperson for telling, at least I was right in that age group.
You can include me in there too. Don't separate yourself.
I mean, I don't want to typecast anybody, so I'll just speak for myself.
Okay.
But I was a youth pastor at the time and had very hard conversations with kids where I was like, I don't know if that's.
Yeah. I don't
think you have to do that.
I was never on that bandwagon. So great.
And for looking at testing spirits or like inherited belief systems, or now we're only, we're 20 years removed, I guess, 20 and change from that, and everyone looks back now and is like, whoa. But at the time that was being handed around as gospel, like it was an addendum to the Bible.
Yep. Wild at Heart was another one, and all of those people were identifying something that was missing in our articulations of Christian life. And so I don't hold any whatever. It's just because 20 years from now, Lord knows we'll be exposed for doing the same thing.
No way.
And who knows? I know, right? We're the
gospel truth at that
point. All right. So the goal of this little series, and maybe you're done, maybe you just are over the Bible and you're like, no more, please. It does beg, every episode begs so many more questions, and totally get that. And man, we're not gonna at all get to them. But there are some things we want to cover that are sort of the basics of, because the question we're trying to answer is what is a good reading, what is a good and faithful reading, and what isn't.
Yeah.
And you can't just answer that without doing a whole truckload of work prior to that. And so we start with what is the Bible? It's a divine and human word. Okay, well, saying it's human has implications, and saying it's divine has implications.
Totally.
And then we mix those two together, and that has implications. And so, if you're over this, I totally get it. And you can skip probably the next several episodes because, this is a tangled web. But I think it's worth taking some time to sort of marinate. And, for Tim and I, these aren't final thoughts. These are kind of statements of where we're at now and how we've wrestled and things that we're currently thinking. And, none of it's intended to be this sort of systematic theological approach. It's more We want to provoke conversation. We want to help provide direction for people who want to make sense of the scripture. Some people just read it and are like, done, I'm done with it, and I want nothing else to do with it. Others read it and are really perplexed and are asking very, very good, legit questions. And so it's to those people we at least want to say, well, maybe here's some considerations, as you think about this thing.
Yeah, I don't know if you watched my Marco Polo from yesterday when I left class. We have our own little Marco Polo thread.
Speaking of the wanderer,
I'm a rambler. But the
I did, by the way.
Teaching English composition, I don't have any English students in my class. It's always an interesting conversation because so many of them are like, why am I here? I don't want to take this class. Like, why do I have to write essays and stuff? We've had really good conversations the last couple of classes about how important education is, how important that my class is just trying to teach you how to analyze and respond to something, to understand it and respond to it, and to develop critical thinking skills. And I started thinking about that in lieu of, because a couple students wanted to write paper topics that were coming from positions that I wholeheartedly disagree with or know to be kind of founded in not fact. Mm-hmm. But as a teacher, I have to walk with them and help provoke the conversation and kind of see their line of thinking through all the way through. And I was thinking about that in regards to what you're talking about right now, and that trying to provoke discipleship in people, but in like a long-term sense of like people who are hungry to chase after learning and mystery. And, a lot of the things that you just said, I think is such a important and lost pursuit in like American evangelical Christianity, that we just don't have a hunger to keep learning and to test things and to be critical and to try to understand a text and then respond to it and find your place in it. And so I think that like realistically, we could do this series on the Bible until both of us die, and obviously not do anything other than hopefully provoke conversation. And
well, that's what's happening to us. That's the great thing is we just get to invite people into what we do. Yep. And so, people will ask, well, why, how did you learn so much? And it's just like, well, I was doubting and curious and skeptical. And it's like
something didn't make sense, and I wanted to understand why.
Yeah. And the Bible is kind of like the source of all of that. So anyway, our goal is
soul.
Is soul.
That's a Bono quote.
Of course it is. Of course it is. So as a human word, we've talked about accommodation. We're talking now about context. And so we talked a bit about, situating ourselves before the text. What community am I a part of? What are the glasses and lenses I'm bringing to the text? Yeah. Secondly, we want to situate the audience and realize that very often the audience is in the exact opposite place of where I'm sitting. And that should provoke humility, right? Instead of hermeneutical narcissism, it should provoke hermeneutical humility, where I'm realizing the distance between me and the first audience. Then I need to situate the text. And what that means is I need to make the Bible strange again. And I need to recognize something called hermeneutical distance, or the hermeneutical horizon, right? That it's far away. And we riffed first on the idea that we're separated by time, and we just used the example of an email, that would be full of cultural references. But those change so quickly, that even something from 20 years ago is not going to communicate. We were separated by culture, and we looked at patron-client relationships as an example of the relationship between grace and faith. And we realized, there's some stuff there that we don't pick up on. It's not that our readings then are totally wrong. It's just that they're not situated well in order to translate them back into what's happening now. Yeah. And so, and this is the hard work of trying as best you can to situate the text in its original context. We're separated by time, culture, and we're separated obviously by language. Anyone who says that, hey, all I need is my Bible is wrong because they've already needed thousands of people editing, copying, translating, making interpretive decisions over the meaning of words. I mean, your English Bible is resting already on a ton of biblical scholarship, tons of scholarship. Not all of it by evangelical Christians. And so just to say, to be suspicious of outside influence in your Bible, it's like, it's too late. Just that you would get it, that you're reading it in English means it's already been filtered. Yeah. And there are different approaches and translation philosophies. Gambas has talked about those, so we won't revisit that topic. But, excuse me, the realization that this sits behind us, it's in Hebrew and Aramaic and in Greek. And obviously we don't have at all working knowledge of those. There are all sorts of internet tools, but that's not a working knowledge of the languages, right? And the nuances. I mean, when you read certain levels of like commentary scholarship, going back and forth on Greek words for 20 or 30 years, I mean, is very common. And so our English Bibles reflect divergence in some places over some of the most obscure words. Some of the sentences in our English Bibles are very, very, very hard to translate. Yeah. And every word is disputed by scholars. Now, the nice thing is nothing major rests on this, except for one example, which I personally hold dear, and that is keeping women quiet in church. The 2 Timothy or 1 Timothy 2 passages, every word of that thing has been disputed forever. But and that's a different podcast for a different day. The point is that language, I mean, think about how English works with 2, 2, and 2, right? Or if I say, hey, that's a good dog, I can mean, well, that my dog just went outside to go to the bathroom, or I just had a good hot dog. I'm at the ballpark, right? And that's just
I did
silly.
that when I was at Vox OC with commas and the let's eat grandpa with no comma, and just like basic grammar lessons, but how different a comma changes. Like if you're looking in hindsight or translating, you're like, why are they talking about eating their grandparents? Yes. Versus inviting grandpa to dinner.
Yeah, and there wasn't punctuation, and there weren't verse markers or headings. I mean, your English Bible has had so much inserted. Now, that doesn't mean you can't trust it, but it means that there is still work that has been done and needs to be done. All right, so I mean, and think about all the new words we have just for our tech age, right? I mean, I would never have known what Googling something,
totally,
meant, or I mean, good Lord.
Or how confusing tweet might be in
100
years.
Right, my tweets.
Why do they all speak like birds?
I love when you do that accent. It's just very funny.
It really ties the room together.
Oh my goodness. And so, words are such interesting. I mean, and a great example of this, of course, are the 4 different Greek words for love. Yeah. Right? We just have an English word, love. But, the 4 different Greek words are very nuanced, and they mean different things. Or it's like the fruit of the Spirit. Like, Paul isn't describing 6 different parts of the fruit of the Spirit. He chooses a word to describe singular. The fruit is singular there. To describe the love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control kind of fruit. So it's one fruit that the Spirit produces, but it looks like that. And so he has to use a word. I mean, our words about homosexuality are massively important in 1 Corinthians 6. And a lot of the debates about the appropriateness or not go around, Paul's using words that he doesn't use anywhere else and that aren't common in Greek language. So the language, I mean, absolutely matters. Like, even think about the Beatitudes. We read, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of God. And we think, if I want to be blessed, then I have to be poor in spirit, as if it were a reward. When in actuality, Jesus is just saying the people who are poor in spirit are already in their blessed place. Yeah,
and we have a whole episode on that at the beginning of the
whole episode. Yes, in some languages there's no room for privacy, or no language for privacy. Or, you hear stories about Eskimos have so many different words for snow, right? There's so many. I mean, even in the Midwest, I follow this account on Twitter called Midwest versus Everybody. And it has a field day with the combination of yes and no's. So if somebody says, hey, do you want to do this? And you say, maybe, that's a no.
Right.
If they say, no, yeah, that's a yes. Or like, yeah, no, that's a no. I mean, and they do it way better. It's hilarious.
Yeah.
But even that, right? Yep. There's so much separation. So again, and we all know this intellectually. We know the text is distant. But when I sit with my English Bible and have been taught to have my time with God and what does this verse mean to me, I just think I can look at it in English and figure it out without any help whatsoever. And I want to just make the case that's not how it works, and that's not how it's supposed to work. And that's not how it works with any other piece of literature. All right, so we've got language, culture, time. Then you have customs. All right, so like head coverings is a huge example of customs in the New Testament. Paul talks about modesty. And you're like, oh, this is weird. I mean, and there are still some churches today, I think, that insist on head coverings for women. But we don't realize the kind of modesty that Paul's talking about isn't sexual, at least in all the places. I mean, maybe in 1 Corinthians, he's talking about church women covering their heads because that was proper in social situations. But in 1 Timothy, when he talks about women dressing modestly, it's economic modesty, right? So we talk about modesty as if it were just this, monolithic thing about
like not wearing expensive clothing.
Yeah, don't shame the poor by what you wear.
Right. Yeah,
absolutely. Dress simply.
Yeah.
And so there were all sorts of customs. So whenever I come to a text that I don't understand, I don't sit in judgment of it. I'm immediately thinking, okay, I'm missing culture, language, time, custom. There's something here I'm missing.
Right.
And so I don't sit there and go, oh, what a piece of trash. I sit there and I go, okay, well, this is going to be interesting to see if there's some background piece here that I'm not aware of.
And that's the discipleship key, right? Like that's the being a student, being a pursuer of the text.
Yes.
Saying this is confusing. I'm going to mark it and maybe figure that out over time rather than being like the Spirit is just going to show it to me.
Yes.
Which is kind of, I feel like how I was raised, where it's like you can open it up and the Bible is God's word. Therefore, the Spirit will just reveal to you whatever you need in that moment.
And could the Spirit do that? Sure.
Maybe. I don't know. I don't feel like I've had that experience, or maybe I don't understand what that means fully, and that's probably a different conversation. But
it's what's God's preferred way of operating?
Right.
Is it the sudden flash? Is it the hard work of exegesis and hermeneutics? Is it the cultivation of wisdom? Right? I mean, I think a lot of the Bible stories that we normalize are there because they're the exceptions, not the rules.
Right.
And so, as we read the book of Acts, you're looking at years going by, but it just seems like, well, and then,
Totally.
Some dude fell out the window and he was resurrected. And then, you know what I mean? And you're like, well, no, I don't know that that's the normal way.
Yeah.
It works. So obviously, as we go on, we are separated. And again, I know we all know this, and I feel almost bad wasting time on it, but again, this is kind of the work we have to do. Time, culture, language, custom, geography. Notice how Christianity is different depending on where you travel. Like I just came to Tennessee, and there's a different Christian set here of behaviors that are okay and not okay than there was in California. You know what I mean? Like hunting is a big deal. Alcohol, everyone drinks bourbon and whiskey here. Now, I don't know if that's true of all the denominations or whatever, but it's like that's a part of life.
That's God's milk.
That in Southern California, no one would just have long conversations about bourbon and whiskey. You would? Okay. Well done as you drink your smart water. But geography plays a part because the customs or the nuances to language, evolve differently. And
that's a good point. That's within one particular country that you've experienced.
That speaks the same language, right? Has the same customs. Yeah. But yet there are these flavors.
The same person's Second Amendment rights.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. But it's different emphasis depending on where you're at. And so, it's just an interesting thing I'm noticing, that we don't pay any attention to geography when we're looking at, so how is Rome different than Corinth?
Totally.
You know what I mean?
Especially in a you're experiencing that difference in 2021 in a very interconnected world where you have people. I'm aware of things happening in Nashville via social media, etc. But from Rome to Corinth, there is no social media. There are letters from Paul, maybe explaining certain things here and there or whatever.
Totally.
They're not even connected the way we are.
No, not at all. I mean, it's so funny. I had a close relative who was fine using the N-word and being completely racist, but I played cards in a church before a wedding. We were playing euchre, just waiting for the ceremony.
Right.
And he was beside himself. Yeah. And you're going, oh, well, that's interesting, right? I mean, so even that creates distance. And as a part of that distance, different from culture and different from custom are value systems. Value systems are rankings of the grievous nature of different acts, right? So in our society, it is not grievous to be a billionaire. In collectivist societies, it would be.
Totally.
Or at least there would be a social obligation to that. Yeah. You know what I mean? That doesn't exist. I mean, so that's just one very sort of obvious example. So value systems are rankings of social behaviors. And so very often what happens is that I will begin when there are parts of the Bible that disagree. So there's the warnings against alcohol, but then there's encouragement to drink alcohol. And we'll rank that, so which is it? Am I free in Christ, or do I not use my freedom to cause others to stumble? And there'll be huge splits and big conversations about something like that. But often what's happening is our cultural valuations are getting inserted into that conversation.
Totally. Yep.
So for some, drinking isn't an issue at all. And for others, like my daughter is in a Christian school and their Bible teacher is talking about alcohol all the time. And it's like, with all that teenagers are going through and dealing with,
especially in this particular time period.
Yes. We want to talk about whether or not it's okay to socially drink, and for me, again, that's a clash in value systems. So
under the same rough umbrella.
Right, exactly. So you take the approach to the text, you take Sodom and Gomorrah. Westerners will emphasize this nature of the sexual sin.
Yeah.
Easterners will talk about the failure of the community, that it was a communal offense. He wasn't practicing hospitality. And in fact, the Bible supports both. I personally think in Ezekiel, it says, here was the sin of Sodom. And it doesn't list the sexual activity. It lists injustice as the issue.
Yeah.
So again, we come at
hot takes.
We come at celibacy, sex, dating, purity with a different set of cultural values than the rest of the world does.
Yeah, we're obsessed. What did Columbus call it?
Obsessed with genitals.
Evangelicals.
Yes, and it's kind of true. And that was the whole purity movement you were talking about earlier, right?
Totally.
It's porn, it's lust, it's masturbation, it's how far can I go? It's that whole thing. And that was the topic. It wasn't wealth, selfishness, greed, how you treat people that are social inferiors, none 100%. Of that.
Yep.
It was, it was drinking and sex that were the things. So those are just value systems. And in some cultures, being single is just fine, and being celibate is a virtue. For us, that's just like, oh my Lord. So when Paul's talking about, virgins and staying where you are because of the present crisis, right? We want to read value systems into that stuff that reflect us and don't necessarily reflect what he's doing.
Yeah, we'll read into it when we're in a fight with our spouse and
That's
be like,
what I'm saying.
When Paul was talking about it's better to stay single, we're like, well, maybe he was, I don't know.
But do you see how we sit in judgment?
Absolutely.
Over, and he's so backwards. And what are we doing there?
Yeah.
Well, we're just critiquing him totally apart from his social setting.
Yeah.
And so I want to give one example specific of value systems that I mean, we could spend episodes on this, but it's an honor-shame culture versus a guilt and innocence culture. And this could either be a cultural value or it could be a value system. It works both. It works in both arenas. This was massively important. For collectivist cultures, shame is a good thing. Shaming is not a good thing, but shame itself is a good thing. Honor and shame have to do with your face. So your face is your outward representation to the world and what people think of you. Westerners make right and wrong internal. We have our individual conscience, and the only thing we say to each other is, listen, as long as you're not hurting anybody else, do whatever. And we make our conscience, our internal privatized guilt and innocence mechanisms, the arbiter of good behavior. And that's why evangelicals spend so much time on sin management, is where they've got to sharpen our guilt indicator to sort of keep us in line. All right. So it's the reason you don't do things in a Western conception is because of you, because it violates your conscience. In an Eastern conception, in an honor and shame conception, the reason you don't do things is because the community is watching. And you will bring shame to your face, okay, which is to your name, to your reputation. So when we teach our kids right and wrong, we're teaching them to listen to that communal or to that individual voice inside themselves. In collectivist cultures, you're taught to respect the norms of the community. And you bring shame and dishonor to your name when you do something that violates the community norm. And you bring honor and favor to your face and your tribe, family, whatever, when you do something that the community determines is good. So you could commit violence in an honor-shame culture, and the community would think that's heroic. And your individual conscience has nothing to do with that. If the community said this was heroic, it was heroic.
Right.
So in Eastern culture, you're not concerned with the rightness and wrongness of the act. You're concerned with how the act is affected by and affects the community.
Right.
And then what the community will say. So when you're preserving your face, what that means is you are accumulating social honor by how you act publicly. Remember, in collectivist cultures, privacy is not something that is valued, even remotely. You're always with somebody. And so, for shame,
your public self in that example that you're giving, there isn't as much of a public and private self.
Correct.
So
your public self is yourself.
Gotcha. So there's not a delineation between the two where it only matters
Correct.
what you're doing publicly and you can be doing whatever privately.
Yes. So we conceive of shame, or at least I do, as what happens when my private self is exposed and my public self is exposed as a fraud, right? And my private self shines through. Shame for an Eastern culture is not internalized like that at all. Shame just means you're bringing dishonor, you're bringing shame to your face, or you are bringing honor and the community approves. And so like when Paul talks about confronting Peter publicly, right? That's an honor shame thing. He was shaming. Yeah. Now, again, shaming for us is totally negative, and shame is almost always negative. In Eastern conception, shame is a good thing. Shame means you're actually governed by communal behaviors. And so, part of why you would be ostracized, right, or cast out or excommunicated was because that was the harshest thing a community could do to you, a death sentence.
Taken out of your community.
Correct.
Yeah.
And your face has been cast off. You know what I mean? So you see this. So like, for instance, and I don't know if this is true, but I've read accounts of like Eastern cultures, even today, that will not fine you for littering, but they will make you wear something that says, "I am a litterer." And then you will perform acts of service publicly in that shirt, thus bringing shame on yourself and, your family or whatever. And so what we hope when we disciple people is that the social norms or the value systems of the Bible get internalized into the person.
Right.
For Paul, these social norms are to be brought and internalized into the community.
Yeah. It's really interesting.
Absolutely. So sin, as one example, has very little to do with you offending God and God being angry at you. Sin in the Bible is communal, and that's why you have instances of all Israel being punished for the sin of one, right? Or God, that's where you get being in Adam versus being in Christ, this idea that the one sort of can represent the whole. Or you'll get the condemnation of Israel as a group, even though there were clear examples of people that weren't as bad as everybody else, right?
Yeah.
So the community is to be saturated with these customs and norms rather than the individual. That's why the harshest thing Paul can say about sin in the community was cast this person over to Satan. Now, he's not saying literally hold a service and invite Satan to take this person. He's saying outside of the new creation space made by Jesus of Nazareth, Satan reigns. Mm-hmm. Remove the person, which is the harshest thing that you could do.
It's really interesting because or at least the thing that pops up in my brain is that it changes the definition of accountability, or at least the way which we have kind of run with it, and then also like the things that get spoken of, like living above reproach, or
right, not giving the appearance of evil.
Yes.
Now,
so that's kind of interesting in that communal sense versus the individual shame culture sense.
Now, just because it's communal doesn't always mean it's good, right? I mean, we have legalistic religious communities that are awful,
right?
And they just teach you to pretend.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? For the approval of others. And so, and Jesus speaks about that when he talks about hypocrisy, the difference between a public face where you're performing religious goods and your private.
Yeah.
So we're not saying, hey, the answer to this is then just to care about what everyone thinks, because our society isn't set up that way, and if you're on social media at all, it will destroy you.
Totally.
But it goes back to, this is the language that the New Testament is talking. So when it talks about like God being jealous, it has nothing to do with him being insecure. It has everything to do with his name being seen as great. You know what I mean? So it's like if my kids started calling somebody else dad, there would be a jealousy to that is totally appropriate, right? And so jealous is an honor shame word. You get this all over. You get this all over the place. So sin affects an entire group. Salvation is conformity to a community. The Lord's, prayer, hallowed be thy name. I mean, that's an honor shame. You get a lot of this. Oh my goodness. You get a ton of this when Jesus is responding to questioners in the Gospels. So a lot of this is honor shame stuff. So the Pharisees will try to shame Jesus by trapping him.
Right.
Because shame, and this is an important thing, shame is there's a fixed amount of honor. And so every interaction, there's a winner and a loser. Okay? Every public interaction. And so Jesus will often, and the reason the gospel writers often include these stories is because Jesus is winning shame encounters by being extraordinary. by asking a question back, and you're like, oh my goodness, that was genius. Like, hey, is it right to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Well, that's an honor shame. That's a provoking question.
Yeah.
If Jesus answers poorly, he is shamed in the eyes of one group, right? Or another, right? Because that was a very fervent question. And what Jesus does, of course, is he says, give me a denarii or give me a denarius. And, he does this brilliant thing. And the reason it's so brilliant is because it escapes the honor shame trap, and he accumulates honor in the eyes of the community. That's why it will say over and over and over, hey, the religious leaders could not kill him or capture him because of the crowd. It's just a backdrop that sits behind the value systems of many things in the Bible.
Yeah.
And so, it should call into account our purely individualistic conception of self and church and God and everything. But it also doesn't mean it's not without its own problems. And there are plenty. Right. There are plenty there. Jesus, in fact, will say, listen, and this is where hate language comes in with Jesus. If you're unwilling to be shamed for my sake in front of your family, you are not worthy of me. That's what it means to hate your family. It doesn't mean to hate them, but it means to be willing to be shamed, to lose honor publicly for the sake of Jesus. So much of that is what's going on in sort of the kind of the background operating system of the New Testament. All right? So, and we could talk, a ton more, but the point is, what we do, and this is because we're hermeneutical narcissists, we just read with very little attention to time, culture, language, customs, geography, or value systems, right? We kind of just put our stuff in there. All right, so let's see, what are we at? 48 minutes. Dang it! I'm gonna get through. I'm gonna get through this next section. It's gonna be so obnoxious, but I just can't sit on it anymore.
I think we're fine.
Well, all right. So how do we overcome the distance? All right, because we can, and we do.
You mean the distance of
the hermeneutical distance, the distance of time, culture, language, customs, geography, value systems. And we do this with a fancy word called context, right? Humility leads us to pay attention to everything in a text. So whenever a place is named in the text, we pay attention to that and wonder, what's happened there?
Okay.
Every time we read about a custom, okay, well, that's shorthand for something we're missing. When Jesus gathers in the Feast of Unleavened Bread and does X,
right,
and says, I'm the bread of life. Well, okay, there's something big happening.
Yeah, it's not just him making a bread reference at a bread festival.
Yes, exactly. So you begin to start just asking questions about time, about place, about characters, about names, about language. And then you do the work of context. So I'm going to give, and Dan Kibble has a great saying that he quoted from somebody else that just said, hey, never read a verse of the Bible. Just never read a verse. Yeah. You can do a lot of damage with a verse. You have a harder time doing damage when you're doing the work of context. So, and this is the no duh, and I'm going to go through this as fast as I can with examples. All right? All right. Usually, sometimes there is context in a verse that's missing. So like, for instance, at several churches I've worked, we would talk about vision statements using this verse. Right. Where there is no vision, the people will perish. Mm-hmm. And it's just funny because there's a second part of the verse that says, but happy is the person who obeys God's law. Right. Now, that is an example of something called parallelism, which is all throughout Proverbs, Psalms, even Jesus, when Jesus says, he says, Father in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. Sorry, I have it memorized in the King James. That's parallelism. He's saying the same thing twice. He's not saying two different things. So what's it mean for his kingdom to come? It means his will's done.
Yeah.
And what's it mean for his will to be done? It means his kingdom is coming. And so because we rip off the second part of, but happy is the person who obeys God's law, right? The vision that's being talked about there isn't my strategic plan for the church and reaching, the nations. It's a vision of God and a vision of Torah and a vision of my relationship with God, right? It's not, it's like, no duh, but we can do a lot with a verse out of context. So there's context usually within a sentence. All right. Sometimes it'll correct itself in a sentence. Sometimes
just in the end of the sentence.
Yeah. Yeah. Pay attention to what comes after the semicolon.
Right.
Then there are context clues in the paragraphs. So a great example of this is when James talks about resisting the devil in James 4, and you're wondering, and I've been told specifically what that is. That's rehearsing my testimony. That's rebuking the devil. But as it turns out, if you look at the paragraph, it's talking about how we treat people. And it's just submitting to God and resisting the devil is rejecting the world's wisdom about how to treat each other and embracing God's wisdom about how to treat each other. And that wisdom is gentle. So that's resisting the devil in that context, right?
We talked about this yesterday in my class with what was called hit and run quoting, like always offering context and response to anytime you use a source. Don't just drop a quote and then move on because the reader is confused without the context.
Right.
And so they call it hit and run, like just, so it's interesting because it applies to this in that same way where it's just like throw that verse and be like, all right, you guys.
Resist the devil, he will flee. Yes. It's same thing in Ephesians 4. Resisting the devil or fighting the devil is about how you treat each other, which is just, and again, it's just in the context. So you can have context in the sentence itself, in a paragraph, or in a section, which is a fancy word for this is called a pericope. It's a literary unit. And a great example of this is the thief in John 10:10. We always hear the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And as you read, because there weren't paragraph breaks and chapter numbers and verse numbers, the thief turns out to be the false religious leaders earlier in chapter 9, because he's talking to them through 9 and 10, and not the devil. So he's contrasting his shepherding of people with the religious leader shepherding of the people. And that comes straight out of Jeremiah 23 and Ezekiel 34, where the sheep shepherd sort of thing describing Israel's leaders is used.
Yeah.
Right? So again, okay, it's not, I'm sure the devil does come to steal, kill, and destroy. But if you read it in context, and again, I've made all of these mistakes. I mean, that's how I've learned.
Right.
So you start with the whole sentence, then you read the paragraph, then you read the literary unit, right? Then you read the entire book.
Yeah.
And no one wants to do this, so that's why we like our 1-minute devotionals. But like Gombus right now, he's going through Romans, and on his podcast, I highly recommend it. It shook my entire worldview several years ago when I realized Romans is not a systematic theology. In fact, far less so. Romans was written to deal with an ethnic crisis in the Roman house churches between Jewish Christians and Gentile Christians. And the Jewish Christians, the Jews had been kicked out earlier from Rome by Nero, and we were now coming back into these house churches filled with Gentile Christians. Yeah. And they were judging each other, calling each other the strong or the weak. And Gombus, I mean, he's like into chapter 5, I think, by now, but he does such a great job of highlighting. That's what Paul's doing. He's not giving the Romans road to salvation. This is not the theological end-all be-all. In fact, if you want a better overview of Paul's theology, read Ephesians or Colossians. Those were letters that weren't addressing a crisis and were meant to be circulated. So that's a great example. And by the way, if you want a book on this, Scott McKnight wrote a book that is the best book on Romans, understanding it this way that I've read. And it's relatively accessible. It's called Reading Romans Backwards. And he deals with the so then bits of Paul first and then shows how all the theology that comes before that.
Yeah, I'll link it in the show notes, not from Amazon.
Tim would kill us.
Yeah.
But Tim's doing a great, please, if you're, again, you got to work with Gombas. You're like chewing on 45, 50 minutes of like him lecturing, and it's so good.
Yeah, too. When he started it, he has his own, I don't want to say version of Romans, but he's printed out his own, like, without chapter breaks and that kind of stuff, so you can follow along. And then he's offering it. I got it from him immediately. He'll email you a copy of it so you can follow along. And I just print it off with blank pages in between each page to.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, so it's Romans without the verse numbers, paragraph breaks, and chapters.
Yeah.
Yep. Another example of reading the whole book is the least of these in Matthew 25, where you're talked about how you treat the least of these. And I know this is a total bummer for all of our activists out there, but when you read the least of these sort of in Matthew, when he talks about the least of these brothers of mine, he's talking about the disciples. This isn't like the poor, although that of course is commended.
Yeah.
But he's talking about the disciples, how you treat the disciples, and those that will come after him bearing the message. And so, and that was a very common way in collectivist culture. To be someone's apostle meant that how they treated you was how you treated the one who sent you.
Right.
So that's why Jesus will use language in John like, hey, if you reject me, you're rejecting the one who sent me. Then he'll use language about his disciples. If you reject them, you reject me. That's how it worked.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? All right, so once we've got sentence, and this is what you teach. I love that you teach English. This is just what it is to read. So we've got the sentence, we've got the paragraph, we've got the section, we've got the book, and then you've got the corpus. Now that is a fancy word for all of the writings of the same author. Now, you don't use this one first because very often the audiences in the New Testament didn't have the other books.
Yeah.
Right? They just had like maybe one or two of Paul's letters. When they were reading 1 Corinthians, they didn't have 2 Corinthians. You know what I mean? Or maybe
you assume that because Stephen King wrote one book about vampires, that all books are about vampires.
Exactly. So a great example of this is how people use the phrase abundant life in John's gospel. When if you look at what life means throughout his gospel and then 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, it doesn't have anything to do with abundance. As we define it, it has to do with eternal life. An eternal kind of life that actually begins now. So often, and we can do that with Paul in ways the original audience couldn't. We'll see how Paul uses a concept like justification in some places and then chooses not to use it in other places and ask why.
Yeah.
So all of this helps bridge the distance. Often the text will give us clues itself if we just pay attention long enough. Then we have to go to cultural context. And this is where we have loads of scholarship, some good, some bad, on backgrounds, archaeological digs, ancient texts, inscriptions, coins, we get so much insight. The Dead Sea Scrolls were the biggest find of the 20th century because they bridged the horizon. Almost 1,000 years, we were seeing copies of the Hebrew Scriptures that were earlier than the ones we had. And then we also saw some of the other writings of the Essene community and some apocalyptic literature floating around at that time that we could compare to Revelation. And you're like, oh my goodness, this is incredible. So we've already used cultural context as an example with head coverings. But you also get to Paul's statements about women speaking, and I would argue, and we've talked about it on the pod, of course, those are absolutely cultural. Greet each other with a holy kiss, cultural. When Paul says in that same text, I want men to raise holy hands in prayer, not everyone's raising their hands. It's just, there is a place, and it's not the place of primacy, but there is a very important place for this background. And that's where people like AJ, or I've read historians like John Dominic Crossan, who is who he and I would not agree on much, although obviously he's much smarter than me. I read loads of history written by non-Jesus people to learn what Rome was like, and that can't help but enliven.
Yeah.
And then obviously, once we've dug through all of that, then you sit in the entire Bible, and and a great example of this is where Jesus calls himself the Son of Man. And you're reading that in the Gospels, and you're like, why is that capitalized? And then you realize, oh, that's something from Daniel, but then Daniel has a very specific context that then gets picked up when Jesus talks about his second coming. And certainly in Revelation, the way the text sort of portrays this lamb that's been slaughtered, and you're like, wow, there's a thread there. Or new creation, right? The new creation, the image we get from Genesis 1 and 2 that's reinforced in the book of Isaiah, mentioned again in the text of Acts and several of Paul's letters, particularly in 1st or 2nd Peter, and then brought to a close in Revelation, like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And so we just sit, and I know this sounds like an immense, who has time for this? Of course. And that's why, hallelujah, there are people like the Bible Project or Scott McKnight or Tim Gombis or Amy Jill or whoever who are doing a lot of this scholarly work.
And they've been doing it for decades.
Yeah, and they're building, building on other people who were doing it for decades. I think that's
such an important part of all this is like, it does seem like a daunting thing when you look at it from a bird's eye view at the enormity of it all.
Yeah.
But it's not something that's meant to be understood and tackled in an afternoon.
Yes. Hence patience.
That's why I'm so interested in like the discipleship as what that looks like. Because I think we have been ingrained with an idea that this is magic and that it does happen in the moment, and then we become frustrated and we let go, or we just take anyone that's going to give us something definitive in the moment. We'll take that and just say, okay, I can file that away and move on to the next definitive thing. But there is a lifelong pursuit. It's a long road to get to, I don't know, it's a journey. It's not a destination, or it's So how do we measure faithful reading in the meantime? I don't know.
Well, I think Jesus is super clear on this.
Yeah.
I think Paul is too. Right? Fruit.
Right. Yep.
So there isn't a big division in the Bible between what you believe and what you do. What you do is what you believe. Right?
Yeah.
So you can say, yeah, I believe God owns all my money and I'm just managing it. And then you hoard and you're greedy and whatever. Well, that's what you really believe. It doesn't matter what you say or sing, right? Your beliefs are always shown through the way that you live. You can give lip service to anything. So in the Bible, there is no distinction between what you believe and how you live.
Right.
But we've had to do that in America. And we've talked about this, very recently, because we wanted to divorce love of neighbor and love of God. We wanted to separate those two things. So that's why many of us are suspicious of social justice or, BLM or all the cultural things that are happening around us, because we've been taught that isn't part of the gospel. And I think what the New Testament teaches is, it is part of the gospel, because the gospel is social and the church is supposed to be justice. It's supposed to be, and Gambas has some great stuff on this. But the point I want to make here is simply this. As we're working out our perfect doctrines and our, revived understandings, like, we are held accountable to how we are living in the meantime, right? That is, you can have, and this is where I always thought, and forgive me for being naming people here, but I always thought it was so interesting when Rob Bell was called a heretic. Because for me, for a while there in the 20s, it felt like the future of Christianity was either going to be Mars Hill, Seattle, or Mars Hill, Grand Rapids.
Right.
And so I was very curious about this. And then Rob got deemed heretical. But for me, and I've thought this from the day that farewell, Rob Bell tweet came out from John Piper, what's the greater heresy? Having doctrine that doesn't quite line up and being compassionate and working for justice, or having doctrine that has been approved by a specific community and being a dick.
Right. Absolutely.
And to me, the Bible's really clear on that.
Yeah.
The greater heresy is failure to love. So now, theology will inform what kind of fruit counts as Jesus-shaped fruit, right?
Yeah.
Because, we could all just say, hey, be nice, and that's just what the fruit is, and that's not the fruit that Jesus identifies. The fruit is Jesus-shaped, right? That's the point. Well, how do you know what Jesus-shaped fruit is? Well, that's where you've actually got to go to the text and sit in Jesus. But it's very important to understand, at least for me, the goal of this isn't to arrive at some crystal clear place of absolute clarity, where I have a nice theological system backed up by what I think are all these great readings. As somebody who loves philosophy and loves studying, of course, I love that. I'd love to have a chart and a graph somewhere that just sort of captured all this. The problem, of course, is none of that's the goal of it. And so the only way to measure faithful readings are do they produce Jesus-shaped fruit in communities, not in people, in communities.
And
so
that
you can
takes
have
hermeneutical humility.
Yes, it does. Because then it opens up the possibility there are people out there who believe very differently, but who act in a more Jesus-like manner. Mm-hmm. And there are people who believe, at least what we would say to be orthodox, but they're awful people. Mm-hmm. And which is the greater heresy? Now, that doesn't mean there isn't heresy on the other side too.
Right.
And the goal is a faithful reading, right? I want to approximate, the goal of my discipleship is to approximate Jesus' life. Now, that is a partnership between me and the Spirit of God, but I want to approximate Jesus' life through and in my life.
Right.
Right? And community is necessary to do that. You can't do that apart from community. So I need the text, but I don't need the text as the end in and of itself. Mastery of the text is not the goal. The text is mastered when we keep coming to it in a humble position and we're seeing the fruit of its transformation in our real lives.
Yeah.
Right? That I can say after studying the Bible, I don't know more, but I've become more loving. I imitate Jesus more with people who I used to think were enemies. Mm-hmm. Right? That is the fruit of proper interpretation.
Yeah.
So we're going to have a whole episode on that sucker, because to me, that is one of the most important points we've got to make is yes, let's take the Bible off of the sacred golden tablet pedestal. Let's elevate it even higher than that by receiving it as it comes to us, the divine and human word. And then recognize that the work that the Bible is supposed to do in us is to baptize us into a reality where Jesus is Lord and that the world is conquered through the sacrificial suffering of his followers.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's the kind of thing we're sort of populating our imaginations with. So to me, that's the proper, now, and again, I mean, I'm sure there are all sorts of nuances we're missing. But to me, that's the proper ordering. The text witnesses to Jesus. The text isn't Jesus. The text is to provoke fruit in me. And if it's not, then I'm reading it wrongly, no matter how rightly I think I'm reading it. And I think that is absolutely one of the most colossal mistakes we as American Western Christians have made has been to somehow think that our right thinking is the goal of this thing. Mm-hmm. And because if you're consumed with that, and I've been there, man, I have been there. When I was in college, I was an ardent Calvinist. I found it so philosophically, just airtight and had an answer for everything and it could explain evil. And then just a very gentle guy took me to the Bible. And he's like, all right, well, what do you do with this? Yeah. And it just didn't fit. Now, that didn't mean the other system, everything fit either. So I've tried to get beyond systems to let it all sort of hang in balance and in tension. But if you're dying in all of this and you're so frustrated, it feels so overwhelming, here's what I want you to do. Seriously, stop listening, pick up the book of Mark. Grab a pad of paper and a pen. Start in Mark 1 and just write down questions. Right? So it's going to say the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, son of David, I think, or something like that, son of Abraham. And you're like, okay, right there. The beginning, gospel. Okay, I think I know what gospel is, but is gospel that Jesus died for my sins? Is that gospel here, or does he mean something else? Because what he means is what he's about to spend 16 chapters writing.
Right.
That's the gospel. Right? So, and you're like, well, who cares if he's the son of whoever? Who's Abraham? Who's David? Why do they matter? Right? And I know we just said this like last episode, but I mean, it just bears repeating. When this gets overwhelming, take away all the other stuff and pick up Jesus of Nazareth.
Yep.
I don't believe the Bible because I believe the Bible. I believe the Bible because of Jesus.
Yeah.
Now,
and
I know
the Bible tells you to do that. I mean, that's...
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. And the objection is always, yeah, but you have to use the Bible to get to Jesus. Yeah, but I don't use the Bible as the word of God to get to Jesus. I can just pick it up and read about the historical person of Jesus and ask, does this give any indication of it being a representation of how this guy actually lived and talked? Mm-hmm. That's not a word of God conversation. That's not inerrancy, infallibility, or any of those big words. That's just, was there a real person who acted like this? Because I found it so compelling that I thought, okay, well, how does this guy see the world? Mm-hmm. And you can't ask and answer that question without going straight into the Hebrew Bible. And then you're in the wilderness, baby. But now you're in it with Jesus at your side. You're not in it just alone thinking, do I buy this or not? Mm-hmm. So anyway, that's what I got.
It's good.
That's all I have to say about that.
That's all I got to say about that.
Good Lord. I hope this is helpful, brothers and sisters.
It's helpful for me. So
it's helpful for me.
Yeah. If we can use that as a barometer, I think it's helpful.
What's Gambus always say in his podcast? He's doing it for him.
Yeah. A little bit different.
Yeah. We're not doing it just for us, but we benefit greatly.
Yeah.
But keep firing questions. We're sitting on a couple of doozies that are really, really good about all this stuff. And so we'll get to them at some point, but I'm trying to just get through like a bunch of material, and if it's helpful, please tell us. If it's not helpful, please tell us. Do these episodes, and if they are helpful, what do they help you do?
Yeah, I like that.
What do they help you do? I'd love to hear that. And only because, unless you talk to us, we just don't know. And we make some assumptions about our audience that, we just find wonderful exceptions to all the time.
Yeah, I mean, we make assumptions based on a very small sample. Yeah. And so it would be interesting, we have it's always in the show notes, but you can email hello@voxpodcast.com. And I think that's
Vox Podcast? Is that still our one?
Yeah, our emails haven't changed, but
that's good.
I think that's a really great, I would love to hear all that stuff too. I think that's really interesting. And I think that's, in a weird way, that's a way of doing this in community the best that we can via what a podcast is.
Totally.
Right? Like,
yep.
So, I think that'd be fascinating.
Well, you've heard it here first, folks. Tim Stafford, fascinating.
Fascinating.
May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord shine his face upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance to you, and in these days, may he give us peace. Amen and amen. Until next time, friends, thank you for tuning in.
Thank you for listening to this conversation. Voxology is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that is supported by listeners just like yourself. If you'd like to partner with us, you can do so at patreon.com/Voxology. You can also join the community and hang out and chat with us on the socials. Facebook.com/Voxology Podcast and on Instagram @Voxology. Thank you for walking the long road with us.